Well, hello everyone. My name's Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses. A very warm welcome if you are visiting my channel for the first time, and an equally warm welcome back if you are not. Books are just the gift that keep on giving, aren't they? I've had yet another astonishing reading month. I've really enjoyed it. I think especially at this time of year, snuggling up with a book because it starts to get a bit chilly in the evenings in the UK is just an absolute pleasure. But yeah, I just seem to have picked some absolute stars. So without further ado, I will plunge in. So the first book I read this month was this one. It's called Beautiful Scars by Tom Wilson. Now, I've had this book on my shelf a couple of years. So I am an absolute Tom Wilson addict. He's a Canadian singer-songwriter. He's a rock star out there. He is a member of a band called Blackie and the Rodeo Kings, who I am absolutely obsessed with, to the point where they don't tour abroad very often. They're on the road all the time in Canada, but rarely make it over to the UK. I've been lucky enough to see them twice in the last 10 years, maybe. But I think they're just superb. I am a super fan to the point where I've thought about going to Canada, especially to see them. Fortunately, my husband likes them equally, so that's all right. But Tom Wilson wrote this memoir some time ago now, after discovering that his mother was not who he thought she was. He'd had suspicions all through his childhood. And he grew up in an incredibly dysfunctional family. So the story sort of traces right from birth all the way through Tom's life until pretty much the current time when he was writing it. He discovers some incredible things about himself, but also I think for me this is like Demon Copperhead brought to life. I would say there are an awful lot of parallels between Tom Wilson's childhood and Demon's childhood. So I think if you enjoyed Demon Copperhead, you would really enjoy this. And the way that he writes is just so honest. You know, he suffers with drug addiction. He really goes off the rails. He doesn't always treat the people around him very well. His relationships are very fraught. But you feel as though it's a no holds barred account of his life. You need to be a bit of a muso, I suspect, to enjoy this, because possibly, I don't know, because there is an awful lot in here about his musical career as well. But I found that fascinating too. You know, his whole reason for sort of picking up a guitar, and he at a very young age, he plays this fantastic trick. I won't spoil it in case you read the book, in order to obtain a guitar to play, because he's just decided that he doesn't fit in at school. You know, he's got lots of problems, and he thinks the solution to it might be music. So even from quite a young age, he sees himself as a bit of a rock god. But anyway, I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was brilliantly written. And yeah, I'd put off reading it because I was worried that I might not enjoy it. Beautiful Scars is also the title of one of his songs, one of my favourite songs that he composed. So there we go, that's Tom Wilson's Beautiful Scars. He's also an amazing artist. He's worth following on Instagram. He calls himself Lee Harvey Osman for some reason on Instagram. But yeah, he's very much into looking at reinstating the history and acknowledging the First Nation people in Canada. So again, you know, politically I find him very interesting too. Talking of politics, the second book I read this month was The White City by Roma. I don't know how to pronounce her surname. Tearn. I've had this book on my shelf for a while as well, and it wasn't an easy read. I found it really hard because of the subject matter. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a really intense, very thoughtful, very intellectual exploration of what it's like to be a refugee in this country, what it's like to be other. Basically, the White City is London. It's a kind of sort of semi-futuristic London, I'd say. And it's white because London is locked in snow and has been for years. And so there's this kind of nod, well, more than a nod to climate change politics all the way through this novel. Her main character is called Hera, and she has grown up as a Muslim, but she's rejected her Muslim faith. She's gone to live away from her parents. She finds her parents irritating, particularly her father, and she's not estranged from them though. She visits them. She keeps an eye out for them. Anyway, the novel opens with her brother being arrested, and he's arrested for a terror crime, which we don't know whether he's committed or not. They don't know whether he's committed or not, but they feel he's innocent. And the book kind of explores how the arrest of her brother affects the whole family. Hera has a very sort of difficult relationship with a lover too, who's a much older man. That's explored in a very interesting way. And I think she writes so well about alienation, about the idea of not fitting in because of where you've come from and the reason that you're there. Her parents had left a regime, one horrendous regime, to come and live in the UK, and kind of find themselves actually in a regime that is just as bad, and it represents modern Britain. You know, it really gets to you. There were a few things that grated with me. You can hear a little bit of hesitancy because I really loved it, and I'd like to rave about it perhaps a little bit more than I am doing, because one of the things you'll know if you've watched my channel, I have a real issue with things written in the second person. It doesn't work for me very well. And she dips into the second person when Hera is addressing her lover. And I found that a little bit, it just dragged me out of the narrative. My disbelief was not suspended when that happened. And the other thing that isn't a criticism, but just a kind of, I don't know why, a lot of the characters in the novel have got classical names. So we've got Hera, we've got Hector, we've got Calypso, we've got Calchas, we've got, there's a whole host of classical references. And maybe it was just me being a bit dim, but I couldn't quite understand why they were there. I don't know whether it's to do with the timelessness of the issues that she's addressing. There's a given what's going on in Gaza and Palestine at the moment, there was one reference. I mean, this is the thing, she comes out with these amazing sentences that just really sum up things that you would think were very difficult to put into words. Hera, he will say, a century ago, every single Muslim country was ruled by non-Muslims. Of course, this has had an effect on the world. How could it not? And I just thought, bang, that is so much the root of a lot of the problems that we have in the world that we're living in. It's the fact that, empires spread and imposed their authority, and then there were repercussions, and we're still living with those repercussions. So I thought it was a novel very much of its time. I think it was inspired by the Pinochet situation in Chile and the disappearance of people. I think that's what sort of triggered it, from what I understand. But it's kind of timeless. I mean, there are references to places that sound just like Guantanamo Bay, that kind of thing as well. So yeah, really fascinating. I think worth a read, just because it's one of those books that really makes you think, and also kind of informs your position as well. Then something very different. I read this as my my October reading prompt, which was to read a book with food in the title, and this is Joanna Harris's Lollipop Shoes, which is a sequel to Chocolat, which I read many years ago when it first came out, and then obviously I've seen the film, and I really enjoyed it. Again, I've got slight hesitations about it. I loved the experience of reading it. It was just what I needed at the time, just to be swept into Paris. with, again, it's sort of slightly Halloween-y. You've got witchcraft going on. The main character, whose name I've just forgotten, what's she called? Jan. She has this chocolate shop in Paris, in Montmartre. It's very atmospheric description of Paris. You kind of feel like you're walking the streets. The Place du Tertre is mentioned many times, and the cathedral itself and all the streets around it. So I've really enjoyed that. I felt like I'd spent time in Paris by the time I'd finished it. I liked the character particularly of Jan's daughters, one of whom is extremely strange and obviously has some sort of learning difficulties. Neither daughter fits in very well. Jan has got this boyfriend who's very wealthy, and she seems to be settling for him for all the wrong reasons. And then this woman sweeps into their lives with the bright red lollipop shoes, and everything kind of, the whole narrative set in motion. It's kind of page turnery. I quite like the pace of it towards the end, but I felt that the character development and the introduction of the story was a bit too slow. It took me a while to get into it. Once I was into it, I really enjoyed it, but yeah, I found it a little bit slow going to start with. And then this beauty, I mean, I've had this on my shelves for a little while, and this is actually a signed edition, which Simon very kindly gave me. To Louise, welcome to the Coven, should I be worried, from Juno. Beautiful. I just love the bold brassiness of the cover. There's something about Juno Dawson that I think is really very special. The way that she writes about transgender issues, I think is so generous. I started this novel and felt really alienated. It's a really strange thing. The characters were all talking to each other in a way that I would not speak, and I'm thinking, this is contemporary Britain. Why are they all speaking like this? And then I realised it's my age. I think if I was reading this as somebody in my 20s or early 30s, it would be absolutely fine. And I thought, God, that's fascinating, because I wouldn't feel the same way if I was reading a novel set in the Deep South. I wouldn't find, you know, the dialogue and the vocabulary and the lexis of the characters jarring because they were somewhere else. And I thought that fascinated me. And I did find it that, to start with, I struggled with following all the different, there's a lot of characters in it, majority of them female. So I was getting a little bit confused between some of them. But again, I think that might be an age thing. I think if I'd read this when I was younger, I wouldn't have had that problem. So it really, you know, thanks Juno, you've really made me think about my age. But once I got past that, I just thought this was such a delightful, it is a kind of romp. You know, there's the most amazing chase scene towards the end. There's lots of drama. It's very plot driven. I really enjoyed that. I don't read this type of thing perhaps enough. It really reminded me of the sort of things I read when I was younger, when I really wanted to be, you know, every page was like, ooh, whipping through them. And thinking I'd predicted what had happened, but kept getting it wrong. So there were some really good twists in it, particularly at the end. The end is, wow, it's awesome. It's worth reading just for that alone. But also, as I say, it's Juno's, it's the way that she addresses transgender politics in a way that shows she understands, or tries to understand, the objections of people who are resistant to it. And I think that's a really hard thing to do. And I so appreciate that. I've got a lot of love for her. I definitely want to read the next one. I might listen to it on Audible. I wonder if she reads it, I'm not sure. But yeah, so if you want a sort of witchy romp, if you want to join a coven for a few days or weeks or whatever, I can't quite work out, doesn't take place over many weeks, I don't think. I do recommend this. And then I just couldn't resist it. I'd bought this recently at West Kirby Bookshop, Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls, and it just really titillated me. And I'm delighted to report, I sat down and read it in one sitting, which is very rare for me. And it did not disappoint at all. I absolutely loved it. Again, I think if you enjoyed The Mermaid of Black Conch, you might like this, because you've got this really, I mean, it starts with the portrait of a marriage which is loveless. They're sleeping in separate beds. They had 2 children, both of whom died in very different circumstances. So they're childless, this couple. She's it was written in 1982, so she's very much the housewife. He goes out to work every day. And she starts to feel like she's almost not sure whether she's hallucinating or what it is. She listens to the radio all day while she's doing the housework, making the tea and all that kind of thing. And she hears these words that seem to be addressed to her every so often. Her name's Dorothy, so it'd be like, Dorothy, blah, 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 blah. And then she hears this news announcement on a particular day that a creature has escaped and murdered 2 people, escaped from a scientific experiment. And he's humanoid, but he's a sea creature, and he's got a face a bit like a frog. He's got goggly eyes, he's got a big round face. And surprise, surprise, later on in the novel, he appears in her kitchen and becomes her lover, becomes part of her life. It's such a wonderful story about loneliness and about what marriage can look like. And she has a friend called, I think it's Estelle, who was, you know, sort of sleeping around, got lots of different boyfriends. I think that's quite an interesting topic probably for the early 80s, that idea of, you know, women having sexual freedom compared to Dorothy, who has decided to stay in this loveless marriage because she just hasn't got the energy to get divorced. So I thought it was quite a really interesting reflection of sort of, you know, the sexual politics of the time. And it doesn't disappoint. Some of the scenes in it are just fabulous. The scene where he first turns up, it did really remind me of the scene in Mermaid of Black Conch when she's in the bath and he's cleaning her off. And I wondered whether, I'd love to know whether Monique Roffey's read this as inspiration. But I thought it was fab. I really, really enjoyed it. And I really now want to read other things by Laura Ingalls. And then finally, I've been reading Ghostly, which is a collection of short stories put together by Audrey Niffeneger. There is, she wrote The Time Traveller's Wife. It's a beautiful book. And what I hadn't realised till I started reading it was that she did the illustrations as well. I didn't know that she was an illustrator, so I'm just trying to find another one to show you. In fact, if I find, I think probably my favourite story in the whole collection is called Pomegranate Seed. There we go. And this, so there is a story in here by Audrey Niffeneger, which was really good. But I think my favourite was Pomegranate Seed by Edith Wharton. I love Edith Wharton as a writer. And this is such a, the way the tension builds in this story is fantastic. So it tells the story of, again, it's a portrait of a marriage, but it's quite a recent marriage. And I think, I'm guessing, I don't know when she wrote it. I think it would be the early 1900s, I'm pretty sure. And so they're married, they've got staff, that, you know, they're a reasonably wealthy, well-to-do American couple. He's been married before and also has a couple of children, so she's become a stepmother. And he goes off to work every day, and there's a connection here with Dorothy in the previous book I was talking about, in Mrs. Caliban. There's a similar feel to it in a way, actually. I hadn't really thought about that. But anyway, he keeps getting these letters. These letters keep coming, and because the letter's brought in by some sort of butler, I imagine, and left on the side, and she sees these letters, and every time he gets one of these letters, his mood changes. And she's concerned that he's having an affair and so on. And the way that her psychology is explored as she starts to find out the truth about these letters, if indeed we ever, yes, we do, I think we do find a truth by the end. But it is really, really haunting and clever, and I like the way that his former mother-in-law has a role in the story as well. I thought that was a really interesting take, but it's just consummately told. There isn't a duff story in here. Some of them, you know, are Victorian, and the politics is a bit suspect. Perhaps make you wince reading it nowadays. Things like this, you know, the story by Kipling in here. But I don't think, if you're looking at, I don't think we should not read those things just because the political climate's changed, and, you know, my political views are not aligned to Kipling's in any way, shape or form. But I think it's really important that we go back and read these things to remind us of what the world looked like and the views that people had. And actually to remind us also that we haven't necessarily come as far as we might like to think we have. So I think I can justify that. The only thing I would say, and she does sort of comment on this at the beginning, all the stories are English and American authors, even though in her introduction she writes about, you know, she mentions that ghost stories appear in pretty much every culture across the world. There is a very sort of Western-centric approach to this. But nevertheless, I did thoroughly enjoy it. So it's been a great reading month. I don't know what my reading in November will bring, although I've got a couple of things. I'm definitely going to read The Ghost Ship, because I didn't quite manage to squeeze that in October, by Kate Moss. But I don't know what else yet. I'm hoping to read by whim next month, although it's non-fiction November, so I'll definitely be reading some non-fiction, because again, I'm not very good at that, and when I read it I really enjoy it. I don't quite know why that is, but there we are. Maybe that's a discussion for next time. Take care everyone, have a lovely time whatever you're doing, and look forward to talking to you again next week. Bye.